Coming up on the Inside Indiana Business Television podcast, Ball State University economist Mike Hicks takes a look at the year ahead. How will Indiana fare? We'll talk to the new head of the Indiana Retail Council. Brownsburg welcomes a potentially game-changing $40 million downtown development. Hot Room Yoga continues to stretch its reach in central Indiana. We take a look at what 2020 will bring in Indiana sports, and our panel of insiders takes on the top stories of the week. Welcome to the Inside Indiana Business Television podcast. I'm Andy Ober. If Ball State economist Mike Hicks's forecast is on target, 2020 could be a challenging year for Indiana's economy. He says manufacturing-heavy states in particular could cool to what he calls agonizingly slow economic growth. But there is some good news as well. Hicks joined Inside Indiana Business host Gary Dick to give his outlook.
Okay, before we look ahead, let's look back, because 2019 was an eventful year. Again, lots of jobs announcements, a budget surplus, lots of positives. Also, a lot of manufacturing job losses, too.
Right. Well, if we look back even over a decade, we're now at full 10 years of economic recovery. Never happened before. And so Indiana's done fairly well. We've added jobs each year. We've added manufacturing jobs since 2010. And so maybe this year is an anomalous. Maybe after 10 years of growth, maybe there's just a quick pause in manufacturing. And so as we look at this year, job growth, negative, maybe 10,000 manufacturing jobs, but doesn't seem to spill over in anything else. So we've had a reasonably good year despite the factory job losses. Looking into next year, probably a little bit slower growth than 2019, but no huge warning signs anywhere in our economy.
Good. One thing that stood out to me, because it's been such a big issue in our state for a number of years, and that's income growth. And that's a positive for 2019.
Just the last quarter growth, Indiana led the Midwest in income growth. It was a huge piece of good news. Now, nationally, we know over the past 18 months or so, we've been seeing wage growth that has been largely absent from this recovery. We've seen it coming everywhere, particularly in the lower wage sector. So we're beginning to see wage pressure in those very tight labor markets. So that's great news. That keeps employment sustained throughout the year in those areas where households are consuming. Pretty good Christmas season, I think, here in Indiana and everywhere else. So that's fantastic news, and sort of gives a sense that maybe the economy isn't stalling as we thought maybe 6 months ago.
Well, let's look ahead, because there are some on the national scene predicting maybe an economic slowdown, some even talking recession. What do you see in the tea leaves, especially as it relates to Indiana?
Right. Well, it's hard to read the tea leaves. The model, I just cannot force it into recession. There's just too much consumer confidence. Even with the manufacturing job losses, as I said, they're not spilling over into the rest of the economy as we would have expected 10 years or 30 years ago. So part of that could just be a natural progression, manufacturing sort of adjusting to a new environment after a decade of growth. So I think we'll probably see growth just under 2%. I think we're going to continue to see wage growth as those labor markets remain very tight. I think we'll see some pockets of difficult times. We've had a bad year in the RV industry, for example. It probably will rebound a bit this year. And so I don't see any real problems. I think we'll end the year with a budget surplus. If the trade war could be ended, we're going to have a pretty good year. When unemployment rate's down to under 3.5%, it's hard to see fast growth. Where are the workers going to come from to fuel a huge expansion?
As you look at storylines in the year ahead in 2020, as you and I were talking off camera, talent and keeping talent, attracting talent, going to continue to be a big issue right here in Indianapolis, but really in every corner of the state.
Well, that's our number one issue here in Indiana. The jobs that were created over this long recovery have not been as robust. They've been more concentrated in low-wage sectors. Again, some of that may be changing with the wage growth, but we cannot fuel a big modern economy without more of those college-educated folks staying. So what's happening in central Indiana, which is absorbing more than 100% of the growth of the state, really has to extend to the rest of the state. The governor's mentioned that in his concern over growth hitting every corner of the state. But I think that's really the talent attraction, focusing on talent like the Greensburg story, are all part of where we're now headed in economic development.
And a final question, too, as we get into rural Indiana, too, some challenging areas, though, when it comes to job creation and talent, all those issues we talk about. Maybe a bit easier. It's happening in metro areas, but the rural areas face some challenges.
Right. All the job growth in Indiana is happening in these 2 or 3 metro areas. And the advantage Indiana has over the rest of the nation, where, let's be plain, rural has really struggled, is is that we're a compact state. You're not more than 40 minutes from a city anywhere.
Yeah.
So that's a happy story for much of Indiana. I think it'd give us a better rural future than, say, Iowa or South Dakota.
All right. Fairly positive outlook for 2020. Mike Hicks, as always, thanks for being here. I know you're going to join us on The Insiders a little bit later, so we'll see you then. All right.
Still to come, luxury living comes to downtown Brownsburg, and hot yoga continues to heat up in Indiana. But first, the Indiana Retail Council launched in 1961 with the goal of being a voice at the State House on issues critical to Indiana's retail community. The organization now has a new leader. Melissa Coxey came in studio to discuss her vision.
And this literally is your first day on the job.
It is literally
brand new. Well, interesting. You have an interesting background. Most recently came from the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department, serving as legal counsel there. You practiced law at Bose, McKinney, and Evans, also commissioner of the Indiana Alcohol and Tobacco Commission. So your background makes a lot of sense for this position. What attracted you to this position to lead the Retail Council?
So I've actually done work with the Retail Council previously, and one of the things I love about working with Indiana retailers is it's the perfect intersection between my professional and personal life. I'm a mom, and as a mom, I can tell you that Indiana retailers impact our lives in such
profound ways.
Profound
really,
ways. That's right. That's right.
And I think that's reflective too, as we were talking off camera, of the types of membership you have, the types of retail. When you're talking about the Indiana Retail Council, talk about the different sectors or the different kinds of retailers that you represent.
We represent the largest chain nationwide retailers from across the country. But in Indiana, we Hoosiers are lucky because we are innovators, and so we have lots of members that are individual retailers around the state.
You touch on and represent retailers on a wide variety of issues. Sunday sales, alcohol sales, one of the big high-profile issues that is reflective of the kinds of issues that you get active in.
That's absolutely right. The Indiana Retail Council was instrumental in that initiative at the State House.
Yeah. As you look at, I mentioned Grant Monahan in the open there, the longtime leader, I think 4 decades in a leadership role at the Indiana Retail Council. He has certainly left his mark on the organization that you're now taking over.
For sure.
Yeah.
Grant has incredibly big shoes to fill. He has done an amazing job telling the story of Indiana retail. We know that there is more of a story to tell, and that's why I would like to reach out across the state to smaller retailers that traditionally have not had a voice at the State House and get them involved in policy in a way they maybe haven't in the past.
No big issues out there. It's a short session of the legislature, so not really big issues. But as you mentioned, which I think is interesting, is that mix of large retailers and the smaller retailers, and giving all of those retailers a voice.
That's absolutely right. I think that there are so many innovators out there, retailers across the state of Indiana, that can be brought to the table and have a voice with respect to their regulation.
Final question, we'll have about 20 seconds, but the importance of the retail industry, that sector of the economy, is really big. I think people don't really think about it that much, but is an important part of the Indiana economy.
Retailers are the #1 employers throughout the state of Indiana.
All right. The new head of the Indiana Retail Council, Melissa Coxey. Melissa, thanks for joining us. Look forward to having you on the show again in the future.
Great. Thanks so much.
All right.
Later in the podcast, Hot Room Yoga has 2020 growth plans, and we look at the year ahead in sports. But now, Flaherty and Collins Properties recently held the formal grand opening of the Arbuckle, a $40 million mixed-use luxury residential apartment development in downtown Brownsburg. Ground broke on the 210-unit complex in 2017. Flaherty and Collins lead developer Duran Kintner joined us with more.
Let's talk about this development. Brownsburg, a smaller Hendricks County community. This is a big investment, a big project right in the heart of downtown.
Right in the heart, and you said it was small, but it is growing and has been growing for a while. Growing a lot with the single family homes, families moving there for their schools and whatnot. But what the town was looking for was to really do something to bolster their downtown, create an identity, and really attract and retain residents. And the Arbuckle is what resulted.
$40 million project. Give us a thumbnail description of the Arbuckle, really what it's all about.
Yeah, so it is a luxury apartment development, and it is, there's been a lot of apartment growth here in Indianapolis, the Indianapolis market. It is a project you could pick up, put in downtown Indianapolis, and it would be among the best residential opportunities in downtown Indianapolis. So it is something that is unique to Brownsburg and offers the high-end luxury living as well as all the amenities people today are looking for, whether they're young professionals looking for an urban living environment or even empty nesters who are ready to sell their home and move into something a little easier and right in the thick of the action.
And this is really part of a strategy in Brownsburg aimed at keeping people, keeping talent, and also attracting people to grow that population base.
Absolutely. There's still plenty of people who move to Brownsburg and buy homes, but those looking for a different sort of living option without a project like the Arbuckle wouldn't be looking at Brownsburg. So what we see in our projects that we do these all across the Midwest is typically 50% or more of the residents are new to a community. So, and they're also high-income individuals, and that's exactly what cities and towns across the state are looking to attract and retain.
Some people might be surprised at a development of this nature in Brownsburg, but what we're seeing, and Flaherty and Collins is really at the forefront of this, these types of developments going on around the state in communities all over Indiana.
Absolutely. You name it, and probably it's a community who would like a development like this. We have done projects similar, certainly a lot of projects in downtown Indianapolis and in about every large city in the Midwest, but we have Kokomo, New Albany, Elkhart, Mishawaka, Fishers, Brownsburg, and projects coming in LaPorte and Lawrenceburg, and I hope I haven't left any out, but there's a lot of communities who are looking for this way for them to grow in this kind of new era we're in.
Well, you talked about growth, and also is part of it too, communities wanting to create an identity, really a brand,
Absolutely,
if you will.
absolutely. You've seen what happened in Fishers. They wanted to create a downtown, an identity, and it started with our project, the Depot. And I can't list all the projects that have come thereafter, but certainly that's a prime example, and Brownsburg is similar.
Yeah, would you see this trend continuing, these types of developments in communities?
I do. I think communities are realizing that in order to attract and retain residents, they need to kind of diversify their housing options, and this is one of the ways to do that.
All right, Darren Kintner is a general counsel, also the lead developer on the Arbuckle in Brownsburg. And Darren, thanks for joining us, and we look forward to following the progress.
Great, thank you, Gary.
All right.
Remember, you can catch Inside Indiana Business Television on stations throughout the state every weekend. Head to InsideIndianaBusiness.com to check listings. Still to come, what will 2020 bring for the Pacers, Colts, IMS, and more, and our first Insiders panel of the year. But first, the Hot Room was founded in 2013 with a goal to make hot yoga and hot Pilates accessible to anyone no matter their ability. The company has grown to 3 Indianapolis studios, with one set to open in Fishers this year. Owner Hajin Kalgankar joined Kylie Valletta in the business of health.
So it's New Year's, we all feel like we have to detox from the holidays. Fitness is on the mind. So let's talk first about the health benefits of hot yoga in particular.
Well, yoga in general, moving your body in that way is very therapeutic and healing. And then you add the element of heat to it, and it really just intensifies and elevates the benefits that you receive. You'll be able to move your body with more ease because your body is warmed up. Your heart rate goes up, so you get more of a cardio, more intense workout. And also there's this mental toughness that you gain because it is a challenge, right? Like mentally, physically. And so you'll be able to come out of the class feeling like you can do anything after you do a hot yoga class.
Right, you used an analogy of a glass blower, which I really liked.
Yeah, so if you think about it, glass blowers will take the glass and then they'll heat it up to create the shapes, right? Essentially the same thing that we're doing. We're going to warm up the body, warm up the muscles, and then it's easier to create the shapes, the yoga poses, which is really good for beginners. The heat is such a great tool for beginners who've never done yoga.
Right, okay, so let's talk about your locations because you are growing for sure. You have 2 studios in Indianapolis right now, and then you have this third one that you just recently opened in Chicago. Also have one under construction in Fishers. What do you think has allowed your company to grow like that?
First of all, what we do is so transformative. And when people do the practice and they see the huge mental and physical transformations and they access their most powerful lives, they want to share it with everyone, right? And so we've built this community that is just as passionate as myself and my team that wants to share it with as many people as possible and make it accessible to anyone, especially beginners.
So people get hooked, is what you're saying.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you get addicted.
So what can you tell us about the other locations possibly coming to the central Indiana area?
Yeah, so we certainly have a location coming down on the south side in Greenwood. We've already announced that. And then we have a couple more locations to come within Indianapolis in 2020. And we just recently expanded out onto Chicago's North Shore with the Hot Room North Shore.
Very good. Okay. So a big trend in fitness right now is working out at home. You know, the Pelotons of the world where you don't even have to leave your house to get your workout. So is it a challenge competing with those types of online don't leave your house programs right now?
Yeah, so I do online workouts too. The ease and convenience of it is definitely a benefit. But here's the deal, is that it's actually helped our business grow even more so, because now more and more people are interested in learning about how to improve their health and wellness. More people are wanting to improve their quality of life, right? And so they'll start maybe in the online world, and then they'll quickly notice that they're looking for something more. They're looking for community, more inspiration, more accountability, more face-to-face human interaction that creates friendships. And then now they come to our studio and they get a totally unique experience that they can't get in the online world.
And you mentioned one key part of your mission is really sort of debunking this stigma of what a yogi or a person who practices yoga, what they are. So explain sort of how you have diversity in your clientele.
So much diversity. We are so proud of our community that we've built. It consists of all ages, shapes, sizes, diverse backgrounds. We want to make this practice as accessible to anyone, and really anyone can do it. I know we had talked about it earlier. All you have to do for first class is just breathe. Everything else is optional, right? And then you just start doing more and more of the practice. So anyone can do it, and that's really important part of our business model and also our culture.
And when you wanted to expand, why did you look outside Indiana? Why Chicago?
Well, more and more people were coming to us, right? And saying they're started in Indianapolis practicing and they're moving other places, and bring the hot room here. There's nothing like the hot room. So our idea is now, how do we make this accessible to anyone who wants it? And expanding outside of our local geography and showing that this business model works is a step towards that goal.
And just a few seconds left, but a big emphasis right now too on mental health and just more mindfulness. Do you think that's helping to drive people into yoga?
Majority of people's day, people are like locked on their screen, whether it be phones or in the computers. And for that 1 hour a day, people are disconnecting and gaining more mental clarity and more mindfulness and just more awareness of mind-body connection. And that in itself is a huge benefit. And more people are looking for that.
All right. Well, good luck with all your expansion. We're excited to follow you and see where you're going next.
Thank you so much for having me.
Later in the podcast, our insiders review 2019 and preview 2020. But now, when will Victor Oladipo come back to the Pacers? What changes can we expect to see at the Speedway with new owner Roger Penske? Sports contributor Bill Benner joins us to preview that and more on Inside Indiana Sports.
2019 was a big year. Let's look back. I mentioned Roger Penske. I think the big story, sports or otherwise, for as long as I can remember, was the news that Roger Penske, his group, buying the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
I don't think there's any question about it. In fact, that's as big a sports news as we've had probably since the Colts or the NCAA moved to Indianapolis. Will have a huge impact moving forward as we get into 2020. And it'll be very interesting to see how he, no pun intended, steps on the gas and starts making significant moves to both the physical plant of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and to the IndyCar series in general.
What is your feel on that? I hear and I get the kind of the vibe that and the kind of person he is and executive he is, that if there are moves to be made, he's going to make. He's not going to wait.
Well, he's not going to wait. Yeah. And again, this is a guy who's built his career by attention to detail, by being the best in class, and I guarantee he will bring those same standards to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and the IndyCar.
All right, let's talk about our other professional franchises. First, the Colts, the Indianapolis Colts, a disappointing season, I think, by any measure. Did not make the playoffs. Reaction, and then maybe what they're thinking going forward.
Well, one thing I think we've forgotten is that Andrew Luck left 2 weeks before the season started, and I think we got caught up. The Colts overcame that, got off to the 5-2 start, but then I think reality has set in a little bit. They're going to have to decide what to do with Jacoby Brissett. Is he going to be the long-term starter quarterback? They're certainly paying him like one, but they've got other other upgrades to make. I think the offensive line, the running game has been a disappointment over the last few weeks. The defense has not come along, and so Mr. Ballard has his work cut out for him as he looks at the draft and free agency.
All right, let's look at the Pacers. A lot of anticipation for Victor Oladipo returning. The first half, the 2019 portion of the season, very encouraging, very positive. What will we look at going forward?
Well, they've always talked about 3 seasons without Victor, the transition period when Victor comes back, and then when he's ready to go full bore. I think that how he fits into the successful mix, a team that's already established itself as a really good basketball team. But it will start with Victor, because Victor, as much as he's done individually, an all-star, he's very team-oriented. And so I think he will not try to come in and be the Victor of old. He'll try to be the Victor that fits into this particular team.
All right, let's look at the state's 2 big state institutions, IU and Purdue. IU football in a bowl game for the first time in a long time. And the retirement of Fred Glass. What will Fred's legacy be? How will he be remembered for his tenure at IU?
Well, certainly major upgrades in facility, the last of which will be the golf course, which has been much in need for a long, long time. But dramatic improvements to Simon Scott Assembly Hall, certainly to Memorial Stadium, closing in both ends. They've had success, baseball, women's basketball, certainly the football program, but this is Indiana. This is basketball. His legacy will largely be tied to what Archie Miller does with that basketball program.
Let's go up to West Lafayette and Purdue. Certainly a lot of change there. Football program back on the right track. Disappointing year this year. A lot of it because of unbelievable injuries, but a lot of changes too at Ross-Ade Stadium.
Well, Bob Rohrman's come on board for there. They're building that big new, incredible jumbotron at the south end of Ross-Ade Stadium. Mike Bobinski's done a really good job, and I think that was a blip with the football team. Really, injuries dictated a lot of that. In men's basketball, Matt Painter's he's got a solid program. They'll be okay.
Okay, lots we could talk about. We're running out of time. Those we'll look ahead to 2020. Indy soccer, the Indy 11. Thank you. New stadium. Is it going to happen? What do we think?
This is a real chicken and egg, Gary, and I don't know what's certainly going to happen. They certainly seem to be bullish. The legislature took out the MLS as being part of a stadium requirement, but getting the funding, and can you make it in the league that they're in now? I don't know, but I think we'll have some news sometime in 2020 as it relates to the long-term future of the Indy 11 and soccer.
We'll look forward to that, and a lot of other sporting events even before we get to 2021 and the big year that year. So we'll look for that, Bill, as always. Thanks for your perspective, and we'll see you in the new year.
Yeah, Happy New Year, Gary.
Okay,
thanks.
Same to you.
And finally, our group of insiders looks back at 2019 and ahead to how the state's economic landscape is shaping up for 2020. This week's panel includes Center for Business and Economic Research Director Mike Hicks, Hallowell Consulting President Jennifer Hallowell, and IndyPolitics.org publisher Abdul Hakim Shabazz.
Mike, we touched on this in our top story this week with you, but as you look back on 2019, what kind of a year was it? How would you characterize the year for the Indiana economy?
Well, I think the best way to think about it is to look back over a decade. 2019 capped a decade of economic growth. We've never had that before, not since we kept records in the 1830s, 1840s. And so here's a period of time that the Indiana economy expanded, added almost 500,000 new jobs over that time period, really made substantial improvements from the deep recession. And so maybe slowing a little bit with an unemployment rate that's still fabulous, and then wage growth. So setting the stage for the future with maybe some optimism, but some warning signs maybe as well after a good solid decade.
Yeah, a lot of jobs announcements too, really for the past several years. And Jennifer, we were talking about international investment, Infosys and others making substantial investment and job commitments in Indiana.
Yeah, the international investment has grown 300% in the last 2 years in Indiana. And then talking about job growth, advanced manufacturing, life sciences, and the tech industry, with Infosys, story started before now, but expected to bring in 3,000 jobs by 2023. And then we have all kinds of growth in the tech sector across the state. And I think that's really a good story for how the growth will fold over the next few years and bring talent to the state as well.
Abdul, as you look at the big year, from your perspective, the big storyline from last year, from 2019.
I think what was interesting about Indiana was the fact that if you go back, trying to piggyback on Mike's saying at the start of the decade, the situation our economy is in, just struggling, trying to get back on its feet. Now we have worker shortages, almost literally across the state of Indiana. I mean, when I saw a thing on social media about Aldi's hiring, warehouse workers for $20 an hour, no post-secondary education because they're just that hurting for the workforce. Is even more when you get, like Jim would tell you, in the tech trade and that skilled workforce. I think to me that's the big economic impact. And what do we do, about all these unfilled positions and the fact that we have so many Hoosiers that just aren't qualified to fill those spots.
Yeah, and Mike, transitioning from 2019 to 2020, because workforce will continue to be a big issue. But one thing you mentioned that really caught my attention is income growth, because that's been a huge challenge for Indiana. But we've seen some positive uptick in that regard.
Right, at least the last few months.
Yeah.
So if there's a down story of the last 10 years, it's the employment growth has really been concentrated in those low-wage sectors, low-skilled workers. But maybe now we're beginning to see job growth that is accompanied by wage growth, and that sets us up for a better year. Less stagnant economic growth that accompanies the jobs that we've been growing. So even if we have a slow growth year in terms of total employment, because we're just out of people, maybe we'll see a little bit better economic growth with that income across the board.
As we look at those storylines for 2020, I think, and Mike, you mentioned this earlier, talent, Indiana keeping talent, attracting talent here is a big one. Jennifer, I know you work with a lot of tech companies, the tech industry. How's that all shaping up as we get into 2020? Quality of life improvements and all the things that communities are doing, trying to make themselves more attractive to talent.
Well, and that's part of where I think the state has to shift some. We've become the low tax state. We're great for business. We've regulation, all those sorts of things. We're in the top. Where we're not always getting that is the quality of place, the amenities that attract people here. And Abdul mentioned on any given day, there are a couple of thousand tech jobs that are unfilled because we don't have the people to fill them. So we either need to have programs geared toward training people here who can do that, but we also need to recruit people from the coast to fill these jobs.
As one element I wanted to ask you about is the creation of the Indiana Destination Development Corporation. Elaine Beadle, former president at the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, tapped to head that up. But this is an effort that's going to focus on tourism, but also telling the Indiana story to try to attract that talent here.
That's right. I think part of the focus of it is to make it a destination in lots of ways. And up until this point, I don't think any agency or person in the state was responsible for bringing people here outside of tourism, but we need talent here. I mean, the future of the state, and to be able to hit our revenue numbers to do the things we need to do in state services, we need bodies. And so we're very hopeful that with Elaine leading this new effort and the state kind of rethinking branding and marketing beyond just tourism will be really helpful to providing the workforce that we need.
Well, the old slogan used to be, it's a nice place to visit, but you wouldn't want to live there. And so I think what Indiana's going to have to do is, hey, not only we're a great place to visit, it's a place where you want to live, relocate your family. I mean, you think about, just look at housing costs, San Francisco, New York City, and how much more your dollar gets you here, in central Indiana, not to mention a little bit the further you go out. So I do think, attracting that talent, saying, hey, not only is Indiana, are the people great, it's a great place to live, and your money goes a whole lot further.
Mike, do you think this is a good approach? We were talking off camera that some other states have kind of cut out the public funding of tourism efforts. This kind of quasi-public, public-private partnership, the way to go in your view?
Now, much like what IEDC was more than a decade ago, this is what other states are looking to. So the Pure Michigan program is gone. The legislature canceled it. The governor vetoed an effort to revive it. And I think they're spending $60 million to tell their story about Michigan. And we're going to spend $1.5 million and a lot of private sector dollars to do the same thing. And I think it's right. The best important part of this is not going to be attracting more conventions to Indianapolis. We're going to fill these hotels. It's going to be people to hearing stories about Indiana that says, yeah, that's a place I could live. Because there's a lot of good in the state, a lot of opportunity for new population growth, which is the key to the next decade.
As you look at regional economies around the state, and Mike, I'll ask you, anybody can jump in on this, but what regional economies? Fort Wayne, Northeast Indiana has been a lot of activity in downtown Fort Wayne, and that region on the talent side doing a lot of things. Any particular region that impresses you or stands out to you as really getting some things done and poised for growth?
Right. I think, obviously central Indiana is just sucking up population from around the state. But if you look at the greater Louisville area, now that there's access to that part of Indiana to downtown Louisville because of the bridges, the extraordinary amount of regional cities development that's happening in in the three regions, Evansville, Fort Wayne, and then the North Central area, are really doing very well. I think are places that could get to national growth levels over the next decade.
Something I've noticed, this is from practicing law, a lot of some of the smaller communities here in Indiana, just about everybody has taken some sort of plan to rehab, to redevelop, to reinvigorate their downtown areas, whether it's Martinsville's, the Terre Hautes of this world, places that used to be sort of boxed and boarded up, are now slowly but surely starting to come back to life. That shows a lot of the state's mayors say, hey, we need that quality of life, once again, like Jen said, to attract that talent, and that's what they're doing by sort of revitalizing and sort of reinvigorating their downtown areas.
Flaherty and Collins, Indianapolis-based developer, Darren Kittner was on the show earlier in this program and talked about how they're investing the Arbuckle as a $40 million kind of a luxury development in Brownsburg. They're doing projects in Kokomo, in New Albany, in Mishawaka, in places all over the state, and again, really kind of focused on the talent attraction thing, which gets across sectors, but in particular in technology.
Yeah, well, and it's important that they're doing that because we have to create these spaces, and we do see, because of regional cities and other things, that some of these communities are working together more. I think that is going to be the new trend that we see the state going in, that we need this regional collaboration. It doesn't have to end at city limits, because to create the environment that people want to come in and fill the jobs and work in these places, that's the kind of coordination that we need to see.
Just starting out the new year 2020, but in terms of the big storyline you think that's going to make headlines in 2020, what would it be?
Every time I think about the election, I think about how my home state of Illinois just legalized marijuana. I need to go back home because it's going to be the election. It's going to permeate everything. It's regulatory policy, it's tax policy, it's our foreign policy, the election, Donald Trump the president. That's going to be the 800-pound gorilla in the room.
Yep. Jennifer?
Yeah, I think it is too. It's going to impact all the issues and the way businesses conduct themselves and what happens in state government. Between us having the vice president and Mayor Pete from South Bend, Indiana is going to be a hot topic and a lot of focus here. We also have congressional races, the attorney general's race. There's going to be a lot of focus, and it's going to suck up a lot of the oxygen.
Yep. Give you the last word, Mike.
I agree. The Midwest economy, the states that were so important in the 2016 election, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana, have had the worst growth over the past 3 years. And so we're going to see some surprising things happen, a lot of presidential attention over the next 12 months here in the Midwest.
Mike Hicks, Jennifer Hollowell, Abdul Hakim Shabazz, thanks for some great perspective on 2019 and also looking ahead as well.
That wraps up this week's Inside Indiana Business Television podcast. Remember, you can find all of this week's TV segments, as well as the top business news from throughout the state, at InsideIndianaBusiness.com. While you're there, you can also subscribe to our platform of free e-newsletters. This is Andy Ober for Inside Indiana Business.